Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, today the Canadian government has released its first climate adaptation strategy. What's in it? Federal Environment Minister Steven Guilbeault will join us. And we're asking you what supports would help your family adapt to climate change and its effects. What should be the biggest priority? After 12:30, the grocery industry needs more competition, according to a new report from the Competition Bureau. Do you agree? And how are rising prices affecting you? I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. Ottawa has released its updated climate adaptation strategy. Now, it's aimed at making Canada more resilient to climate change. Steven Guilbeault is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and the plan comes with $1.6 billion over 5 years to implement the strategy. And it reaffirms targets which include eliminating deaths due to heat waves by 2040 and establishing 15 new national parks, urban parks, by 2030. Speaking at the announcement in Vancouver this morning, Chief Wayne Sparrow of the Musqueam Nation said,
as First Nations people, the environment and the climate and the habitat has always been very important to First Nations people. In Musqueam, we're a fishing community. Always have been, always will be. I always say as First Nations people that we're here for our next generation to make sure the benefits that we have here are going to be left for our children, for not just the First Nations people, but the people in the country and the province and the city.
That's Chief Wayne Sparrow of the Musqueam Nation speaking today. We're asking for your thoughts as well. What supports from government would help your family cope with climate change? What resiliencies are needed in your community to deal with the effects we're already seeing? And does your community need new infrastructure to adapt to those future hazards? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And my first guest today is the Federal Environment and Climate Change Minister, Steven Guilbeault. Minister, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Is there anything new in your announcement today, other than that confirmation that the adaptation strategy has the support, is a focus, and has the support of provinces as well as national Indigenous organizations?
And I would add municipalities to that list, which is in and of itself a significant step forward, because we know that all governments and Indigenous nations must work together to help Canadians be better prepared to face the impacts of climate change. No one government alone can do this. Even the federal government, there's lots of things we are doing, there's lots of things we will be doing, but we can't do it alone.
Okay, and what's in the adaptation strategy? What would you implement? What are the measures?
So we've set collectively for ourselves 36 objectives with 25 measurable targets. You mentioned a few of them in your introduction. So how do we reduce the number of people who are affected by floods every year? How do we reduce the number of people who are affected by heat waves, by forest fires, tropical storms like Fiona on the West Coast last year? We want this to be an evergreen document. So it's not something that's set in stone, but something that will evolve over time as we better understand how we can implement measures to reduce the risks of climate change. How can we better prepare Canadians? What are some of the things? I mean, some things will probably work better than others. We will need to course correct. We will need to adjust some of the measures.
And do you have any specifics right now?
You talked about eliminating the number of...
Right, and how would you do that?
So, number of things that can be done. For example, my colleague, Minister Wilkinson, will be modernizing the Canadian National Building Code by 2025 so that our buildings are more efficient and consume less energy going forward, but also so that they're more resilient to things like floodings, like heat waves, like forest fires. Lots of things we can do in terms of urban planning to reduce those risks as well. urban planning is not a federal jurisdiction, so it's something we will work with provinces, municipalities to ensure, for example, we don't allow people to go and build in what we know are zone that will be prone to flooding. So these are some of the very concrete things that we will be doing in the coming years.
And what about, will they be older and newer buildings that you'll be working on?
Absolutely. We need to, so the building code will obviously be for new build, but we need to retrofit our existing building stocks to do just that, to make sure that our buildings are more efficient and also more resilient to the impacts of climate change.
What about air conditioning? We know that many homes in this part of the province do not have air conditioning. People simply can't afford them. And it was a big factor this week, 2 years ago, when hundreds of people died here during the heat dome. And this was while your government was in office. How are households supported by this plan? Without retrofitting or building new buildings, how are households supported to be able to get either air conditioning or heat pumps?
Well, you speak about heat pumps, and we have, in fact, put in place programs to help people install heat pumps where the federal government is paying part of the bill of doing that. And they have the double advantage of allowing you to heat your home, but also cool it in the summertime in a very efficient way. So
and in this strategy, will there be support for air conditioning?
It's certainly something we will be looking at. I was talking about the building codes, the modernization of the building code to ensure that we include elements around cooling and heating of buildings. One wouldn't think of most parts of Canada to build a house without including heating from the get-go.
But what about households that aren't that are current, that already exist?
As I said, we in fact have programs where we are helping people retrofit their homes to make them both more efficient, but also more climate resilient. So that there's already federal programs to do that. We can certainly do more, and we want to do more with our provincial and municipal partners. I'm
just trying to see whether that's also included in this new strategy. And let's talk about where homes are built as well. Should they be built in regions that are at risk of forest fires?
I think there are a number of things we can do. So I spoke about building that could be more resilient to forest fires, and that will become a priority for those houses and in areas that are more prone to forest fires. There's a lot that can be done also in terms of urban planning to substantially reduce the risk of when there's a forest fire, that those forest fires would affect our towns and villages, like what we're seeing right now in Canada. So, and these are not necessarily complicated things to do in terms of urban planning, but it does require working with provinces and municipalities.
And when we look at where communities are built, Fort St. John was under evacuation alert last month because of a huge wildfire just 20 kilometers away. When you look at that kind of community, is that a place perhaps where you might reconsider whether construction should take place?
We're not there. I mean, we feel that there's a lot of things we can do. Also, certainly in terms of forest management and how the forest management can help prevent or substantially reduce the risk of large and uncontrolled forest fires in the country. And to that, we can certainly turn to traditional Indigenous knowledge who've been doing that in the country for centuries and learn more and include that with, what Western science is teaching us about these things to help reduce the risks of forest fires. We won't eliminate those risks, but we can certainly help mitigate them.
Okay, within communities that are already built. But you're saying looking into the future, that's the kind of thing you would look at, is where communities are built in order to keep them away from forest fire risk?
No, I'm saying better planning. Lots of people, we're in Canada, people like to have, trees in front of their house, and maybe, we have to ensure that they're not too close to the house, the different kinds of trees that are more fire resistant, that won't contribute to fire spreading in our communities. So rather simple things that can be done to help us reduce those risks.
And finally, why adaptation as opposed to mitigation?
Oh, it's not an either or. We need to do both. We need to do more when it comes to reducing our contribution to climate change by reducing our greenhouse gas pollution, which is what one of the things we're doing. In fact, Canada is the best performing countries of all G7 countries between 2019 and 2021. But we know we've entered the era of climate change. In the last year and a half, 2 years, we've had the worst floodings in the history of Canada. We've had the worst hurricane on our Atlantic coast. We now have the worst forest fires. We had heat domes. It's here, it's upon us, and we need to be better prepared.
Minister Guilbeault, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. That's Federal Environment and Climate Change Minister Stephen Guilbeault. We're taking your calls on this as well. What priorities do you think should be in an adaptation strategy when it comes to the federal government? What supports do you think your family could use in terms of adapting to climate change? And what resiliencies do communities need and your community to deal with those effects that we are already seeing? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. Let's take a call now from Mike at Alert Bay. Hi there, Mike.
Hi, how's it going?
Fine, thank you. What did you want to say about climate change adaptation?
Well, I've been living on the North Island for 30 years now. It's a logging community. And, you know, on one of your radio shows not too long ago, you had an environmental scientist on that really spoke to what really hits the nail on the head. And ultimately, it comes down to, so as we eliminate the ancient rainforest ecosystems, we're eliminating the rains. We are causing the drying out and the desertification of the land. When you take a 1,000-year-old ancient rainforest and then you have 500,000 liters rainfall fall on that forest, it soaks it all up into the trees and into the deadwood that's on the ground. Some of it runs off into the ocean. When you then mow that down and replace it with TFLs, tree farm licenses, for those that don't know, and you have these perpetual regen forests that are cut down every 60 to 80 years, those forests are not a rainforest. They don't hold the water the same way that the ancient rainforests do.
What needs to change about forestry then, Mike?
Well, ultimately, we need to change our logging practices. We need to leave the last of the ancient rainforests alone. We really need to leave them standing. And we need to manage our current TFLs far better. And I've heard the Indigenous peoples speaking to the fact that, you know, this 50 to 80-year rotation of letting them grow to 50 to 80 years old and then we cut them down is absurd. We need a minimum of a 250-year rotation where we do not cut those replanted trees for 250 years.
Mike,
and that is the only way we're going to bring the rains back.
Good to hear from you at Alert Bay, Mike. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you.
Kim is up next now at Shawnigan Lake. Hi there, Kim.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I see drinking water and water protection and sources of water that are resilient and robust as just a critical need going into the future. And that right now I'm not seeing the infrastructure spending. In my community, the lake is obviously overprescribed during the summer months. And so there's people, unrestricted access, really, motorboats, gas-powered motors all over our lake, which is our primary source of drinking water. And then in terms of climate resiliency, I think using technology, low flow appliances, and ways to process and capture gray water and reuse it in the community, I see these as priorities, infrastructure spending going into the future, but it's just not possible right now because we were relying on the collaboration of a large regional local government to be able to make a difference in our little neck of the woods in South Carolina. And so, yeah, like there's serious questions moving forward, especially as we head into seasons of drought.
That's really interesting, Kim. Thank you so much. And as you talk about the local regional government as well, you know, we heard from the minister that there would be that cooperation among various levels of government. So it'd be interesting to see whether infrastructure like those low flow appliances, those kinds of things are supported by this climate adaptation strategy. Thanks for the call. That's Kim at Shawnigan Lake. Aaron is up next in Burnaby. Hi, Aaron. What kinds of adaptations do you think need to be supported?
It's not so much strictly adaptation. It is the uncomfortableness of continuing to talk of adaptation while not doing enough to talk about mitigation. And the fact that we have better strategies regarding renewables and that we continue as a province, as a country, so hence the provincial and the federal level, putting money into fossil fuel projects and to sequester these emissions. And the cost, basically, of adapting is going to continue to go up because of it. We have to do a better job in terms of mitigation and making a more effective, more cost-effective, better decisions around transitioning. You know, it doesn't help that our Premier, David Eby, was cited recently in a Von Palmer article stating that he would reopen or consider reopening Burrard Thermal, which is a 950 megawatt natural gas plant. That's not a great solution compared to other options that we have. So
when it comes to energy use.
Yes.
Aaron, thank you very much. Interesting to hear as well. I asked the minister about that, right? Why adaptation as opposed to mitigation? He said it's not either or, but it's an interesting point that you make when it comes to fossil fuel use. We're going to go to Jane in just a moment, but right now let's bring in Dr. Melissa Lem. Dr. Lem is a family physician in Vancouver and the president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Dr. Lem, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you for joining us. What was your reaction hearing from the minister, first of all, about the plan, some of the specifics there?
Well, I was at the announcement of the National Adaptation Strategy this morning in Vancouver, and overall, I think the plan is a pretty good one. And I think this is a general sentiment that many environmental, non-governmental organizations have across the country, that it has a good mix of zeroing in on the highest climate risks to Canadians over the next few years and also setting some near-term targets that will improve lives. But I have to say that there are some deficits, obviously, with any plan. So one of them is that nowhere in the targets do they mention smoke. So they mentioned wildfires, and I was really happy to see that target moved up from preparation of all communities by 2050 to 2030. But the majority of Canadians will actually not be affected by wildfires themselves, but the smoke that fills our air with pollution, as we've seen across the country over the past month.
We're seeing
And
some of that travel all the way to Europe, in fact.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then also just wondering about where the investments are going to come from. You know, right now, you mentioned that $1.6 billion over the next 5 years have been invested. That's unfortunately not enough. And hopefully we'll continue to see strong investment in the plan moving forward.
What do you make of the distinction between adaptation and mitigation? This policy deals with adapting to the effects that we're already seeing. And we heard from our callers there saying that's not enough. We have to talk more about mitigation.
I think what we really need to focus on in this plan are actions that have co-benefits. So, for example, when you put electric heat pumps into homes and get gas out of them, not only does that reduce the overall carbon pollution that home is producing, but it allows for cooling, which will prevent deaths and sickness during heat waves. When you think about preserving green space, preserving forests, like some of your callers mentioned, not only does that sequester carbon, pull it out of the air, but it also cools urban infrastructure, again, reducing heating and also reducing flooding in times of extreme rainfall. So I think really there are a lot of win-wins that can be had with actions on adaptation that we should be thinking about in terms of their health benefits and how they also mitigate climate change at the same time.
Dr. Melissa Lem is with me now, family physician in Vancouver and president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. As we ask you, what supports does your family need to adapt to climate change and cope with those changes? What resiliencies are needed in order to have your community deal with those effects that we are already seeing? And let's go to our callers now. Toll free, we're 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Jane is calling us from Salt Spring Island. Hi, Jane.
Hello. Thank you for having me on the program.
Sure.
One of the things that I would like to see is that I think that would promote and inspire people around the country to do more is for the federal government itself to stop subsidizing the oil companies, and also to stop building the pipelines. In a way, the idea of adaptation is a bit like street gangs roaming the street, and so the government hands out flak jackets so they don't get hurt by the bullets, and pays for them to put up iron bars in the windows so people can't get in. I think that it would be really inspiring to see the government take a really bold step and say, fine, we are not going to subsidize the oil companies anymore. And I think if they did that, you would see a sea change in the way that people look at climate change. I heard the minister say, talk about the flooding was the worst ever in the last little while, the last year. And I'm thinking 50 years from now, what's it going to be like? My grandchildren will be alive 50 years from now. It'll be an apocalyptic time. And I'd like to ask the minister, are you okay with that? Why aren't we doing more to actually stop climate change rather than dealing with the effects of it? I think Clean Energy BC is a wonderful organization, and we're just putting in a heat pump in our house.
Okay.
But you know what? That's not going to stop what's happening right now. And for our kids in the future, we're basically robbing them of the future.
Jane, thank you very much for the call from Salt Spring Island.
You're welcome. Bye.
Barry's up next now in Victoria. Hi, Barry.
Hi.
What are your thoughts on adaptation?
Thanks for having me on.
Sure.
Well, you just had the point made that subsidizing fossil fuels is really a silly thing to do at this point. We're succumbing to the lobbying of the big oil companies far too much. But what should we do with the funds that we withdraw from subsidizing the oil industry, the gas industry, and the coal industry? Is to put that money into other energy sources. And the one that's not being talked about at all in British Columbia is geothermal energy. The developments in that area recently have been quite exciting. And we're not talking about developing our vast geothermal resources in this province. And it's ridiculous, especially when the BC Hydro is just admitting to us that they're worried about the water supply that they're using to run their hydroelectric dams, which are the major source we have for electricity in this province.
Okay.
So I would suggest that the major thing we can do to adapt is recognizing that the problem is there, stop subsidizing the development of fossil fuels, and put that money into something that's really worthwhile, has a future to it.
Barry, thank you very much for your call from Victoria. Let's go back to Dr. Melissa Lem now, and with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. We've heard lots of points there, different points from our listeners about fossil fuels, for example. I want to talk to you about the heat waves, and the plan here is to eliminate all deaths from heat waves by 2040. What do you make of that timeline that's still 17 years away?
I have to say that it does seem like a fairly long timeline given what we've already seen here in Vancouver. And it's going to require a whole of society effort to make sure that no more people die from heat waves. I want to mention that about a year ago, on the anniversary of the heat dome, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, in coalition with some local environmental groups, went into public buildings, public housing across BC to educate residents in buildings that had no cooling about how to protect themselves during heat events, and also how to advocate to government for more funding for heat pumps and cooling, for example. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't something that I should have to do on a volunteer basis. This is something that government should be funding, should be paying for, so that everyone across the province has the same kind of protection and the same kind of information against heat. And so I think overall the targets are good ones, but certainly more ambition could be had. And I appreciated hearing Minister Guilbeault say that this document is evergreen. Certainly, certain targets could be accelerated and more investments can be made. So I really look forward to seeing more action on adaptation and mitigation, reducing fossil fuel use in the future.
Dr. Lem, thank you very much for your time. That's Dr. Melissa Lem, family physician in Vancouver, president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Let's quickly squeeze in Bodhi and Tawasin. If you could please make your point succinctly, Bodhi.
Hi, Michelle. I've only got one quick point to make. I've only just joined the program, so I don't know what's going on ahead. But the main point I think to make is that mitigation is 10 times more important than adaptation, resilience, and all the other words that are being kicked around.
Okay.
What is happening in Canada is we are not doing enough in mitigation. We are, as you probably know, out of G7, we are number 6. The numbers are just not coming down. CO2 by 2030 should be 30 to 40% down, and I don't see it happening.
Bodhi, thank you very much for your time. Certainly a point that we've heard throughout the half hour as well. Glad we got you in. That's Bodhi in Tsawwassen. It is 12:31 now, 1:31 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today here on CBC Radio 1. And live streaming as well, CBC Vancouver on YouTube and CBC Gem, and as well as on our website, cbc.ca/BC. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk about grocery stores and a new report from the Competition Bureau saying they are too dominant. There is a lack of competition in the industry. So we'd love to hear from you on that. Do you agree? And how are rising prices affecting you? That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A teacher at a Tulsa school has been charged with sexual offenses involving children in Langley has pleaded not guilty. Bhupinder Singh Sanu entered the plea in Surrey Provincial Court this morning. Sanu was charged last month with 3 counts each of sexual interference and sexual exploitation. Prince George RCMP say a home invasion last week is now a homicide investigation. A man injured during the break-in has died from his injuries. A woman was also injured, but police say her injuries are not life-threatening. And the city of Surrey says it paid close to $317,000 on Mayor Doug McCallum's legal fees. McCallum was acquitted after being charged with public mischief after he told police his foot had been run over in a grocery store parking lot. A current city bylaw says all municipal officials will be compensated for costs relating to any incident that occurred while acting on behalf of the city. And now the forecast. A heat warning is in effect for Fort Nelson with highs around 30 degrees. On the north coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 20. Highs reaching 28 with local smoke, a bit of sunshine, and a chance of showers in the Peace. In the central interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 27. Highs reaching 31 with some sunshine and a chance of thunderstorms in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 31 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, mainly sunny this afternoon with highs in the low 20s. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. And Rob, we were just talking about the new adaptation strategy to climate change from the federal government. And we talked a lot about the heat dome. And coming up at 1:30, Adrian Dix, Minister of Health, will be making an announcement about supporting people during periods of extreme heat. So we'll look forward to what is announced there. Hear it on your newscast, of course, and see it on cbc.ca/BC. Thank you very much.
You bet.
That's Robert Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. It is 12:34, 1:34 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today on CBC Radio, live streaming on CBC Vancouver on YouTube, cbc.ca/BC, and you can use the CBC Gem app as well. Very nice to have you with us this afternoon. And time for some emails now. Yesterday on the show, we discussed the 2-year anniversary of BC's deadly heat dome. And here's what you had to say on email. Now, David wrote, there are plenty of subsidies available to homeowners via energy savings. However, there seems to be fewer available to those who rent. Why not provide renters with some access to climate-friendly cooling units or other supports such as discounted transit? Evangeline, who's a senior, wrote, we asked my landlord to put AC units in the hallways, but they said it was too expensive. They put us all at risk. I dread the upcoming heat. Can't landlords be forced to provide ACs to help cool the building? And Kim wrote, it really struck me that one of the simplest things that can be done to reduce the impacts of these climate events would be to stop destroying what little cooling we have left that is provided by the remaining old growth forests. We heard that from one of our listeners, our callers as well. In the face of the climate emergency, the state will protect industry over everything. If we are to survive this, we are going to have to work much harder. And Alice wrote, I paid $12,000 for the heat pump installation with 2 indoor units and did not qualify for a rebate. Most of the time, I use natural cooling by closing windows and blinds during the heat of the day and opening them when it's cooler. And the heat pump will only be used for cooling if those methods don't work well enough. Wendy suggests people who cannot afford air conditioning should try cooling vests that can keep your body comfortably cool for 2 hours at a cost of $61. There you go. There's a tip for you there. And once again, at 1:30, Health Minister Adrian Dix is expected to make an announcement about supporting people during periods of extreme heat. You can go to our website, cbc.ca/BC, for details after that. That's coming up in about an hour from now. Right now, it is 12:36, 1:36 in the Mountain Time Zone here on BC Today. Well, being surprised by increasing costs at grocery stores is not new anymore in BC or anywhere else in the country. And now Canada's Competition Bureau has released its report on competition in the grocery industry. The watchdog began the study in October 2022 amid growing concerns over soaring food prices. And it found that as Canada's grocery business is controlled by those large players, the 3 largest grocers, Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro, and that the industry needs government assistance to encourage more competition to bring down prices. Now, the big 3 collectively reported more than $100 billion in sales last year, earning over $3.6 billion in profits. So while it may not seem to be the answer to rising costs of food, more competition may be part of the solution. That's according to the Competition Bureau. So we want to hear from you. Does the grocery industry need more competition? How do you see that taking place? And do you struggle to afford groceries yourself? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can let us know where you shop as well and how you choose the grocery store that you go to. Our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. And I have 2 guests with me now. Theo Lamb is Executive Director of Quest Outreach Society, and Kent Mullenix is Director of Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Good afternoon to you. Thanks so much for joining us, both of you.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
Kent, to you first now. How big a problem is the lack of competition among grocery stores?
Michelle, it's a substantial concern. Those of us that have been looking at the economics and operations of our food system have long been concerned about increased consolidation in the food system. Folks have been looking at this for a couple decades now and raising concern about consolidation in the food system and the hegemony that occurs as a result of this concentration. It's not just in the retail sector; it's in the supply sector and the processing sector. They're highly concentrated, and it's becoming more concentrated all the time. And many of us who are looking at the food system and its impact on society and our economy are concerned with increasing concentration.
And when you talk about concentration, people may think, oh, I see a lot of different grocery stores, but in fact, the big 3 do own quite a few of those smaller ones, right?
They do. The names on the storefront are not the indicator. It's the parent company.
Mm-hmm. And so why is it such a concern? What does it mean for prices?
Well, it really means control. And what we're seeing in the retail sector is what we would refer to in economic terms as an oligopoly, one step away from a monopoly. And the impact of this is that the retail giants, these 4 retail giants in North America, have a disproportionate control over the prices that are charged for food and the prices that are paid to producers of food. And ultimately, from my perspective, and my great concern is the trickle down impact this has on family farmers. It really is what's resulted in family farmers being price takers. It's the food retail sector that's ultimately driving family farmers out of business.
Okay, so from farming to farming families to families now. Theo Lam, director of Quest Outreach Society, how do those prices affect food security?
Well, Michelle, we've seen a significant increase in the number of people walking through our front doors requiring our services. We run nonprofit grocery store markets across Metro Vancouver, and our clients are referred to us by a number of trusted sources, social service organizations, institutions, nonprofits, schools. And so if you're coming to Quest, it means you're facing some kind of economic barrier, and that the bar is too high to be able to shop at a more traditional grocery store market. You need the food, you need access to healthy food and choices, but you can't make it every day or every week on the money that you're bringing in versus the money you're bringing out. So you come to Quest, and at Quest you'll find groceries and other items at a much reduced price, but you're still participating in that economic cycle, and it's an anonymous experience. It's dignity filled. We've seen the number of clients and folks across Metro Vancouver increase by the thousands in the last year alone. Even in the last 6 weeks, we work with around 350 trusted referring partners, and we've just cleared 400. We haven't seen growth like that in these numbers ever. So what that's telling us is more and more people from different backgrounds and walks of life are saying, you know, I can't do this anymore, whether they're individuals, students, senior, or family. I need help, and they find us. And that looks like, you know, coming to us on a daily or a weekly basis and making choices based on what we can provide them. And they're probably going to the food bank as well, and other places where they can compare costs and just try and keep that total bill down.
Okay, and let's take an email here now, and we're going to put out our phone numbers once again, asking you, do you think the grocery industry needs more competition? The Competition Bureau says it does, and they started this study in October last year amid concern around soaring food prices. And so it's found that grocery businesses in Canada are dominated and controlled by those big three players, Loblaws, Sobeys, and Metro, and that the industry does need government assistance to encourage more of that competition. So we'll get into some of the suggestions and recommendations in just a moment. I'd love to hear from you, though. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. My guests are Theo Lam, Executive Director of Quest Outreach Society, Kent Mullenix, Director of Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. And let's go to an email right now. Ruth is writing us. My grocery bill has gone up by 30% in the last 2 years. Competition won't make a difference because the free market will do what it likes. The government needs to step in and control price increases for groceries in the same way that they do with rent. Here in BC, of course, the rent increase limits that are tied to inflation. But let's go to our guest here, Kent Mullenix. What do you make of that it's actually not competition, but there needs to be government intervention when it comes to price increases?
Well, I absolutely agree, but also disagree. This level of concentration, this degree of hegemony, this oligopoly that's been allowed to emerge is actually anti-free market. It is counter to free market. It is very difficult to get into the food retail business now because of the practices and the economic largesse of the concentrated retail sector. Okay. So we actually need to create a free market in the retail sector, and what government has failed to do is to create an environment where the free market can thrive. They've allowed the free market to be curtailed by the concentration in the food retail sector.
Okay, so that's where competition would come in. Now, Theo, I saw you nodding there when I was reading that email.
Well, I wasn't surprised to hear that Ruth's grocery bill had jumped 30%. That's about what we're seeing, and the impact to our client communities. I think what's interesting about this report, and I don't know if I agree with all of it, but we have such a rich diversity of farmers, producers, independent retailers right here in British Columbia. And so anything that really supports and lifts up the local producer, because it's local that reflects back community, home, and culture. So for example, our clients are coming in and they're not just looking for basic commodities, those whole foods they can use to make new foods, and non-processed items. They're looking for culturally aligned products, and it's going to be our local producers who are producing based on their community need around them, who are going to be most aligned with that need and desire. I do think we need guardrails in place, that we are operating, and Quest is part of a social service network that has guardrails in place to ensure the folks who need access to healthy, affordable food have it. And so some requirements, some guardrails in place at a government level, I think would certainly help organizations like Quest further support community.
And when you say guardrails, that's some kind of government control.
Yeah,
Okay.
to a degree, for sure.
Okay. Theo Lamb, Executive Director of Quest Outreach Society. We're also joined by Kent Mullenix from Kwantlen Polytechnic University, Director of Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security there, asking you, do you think the grocery industry needs more competition? And how are those rising prices affecting you? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. And Nathan writes, apart from the pantry items and frozen chicken, I've given up on no frills. The produce is ridiculously inflated. I've been shopping at Sunrise Market here in Vancouver. They offer substantial discounts on produce as it approaches the end of its shelf life, which is perfect for Arab and Indian Asian dishes. Thank you very much for that. I see Theo nodding to that as well. Let's go through what the report actually says and recommends to create and spur this competition. Part of it is to establish a grocery innovation strategy. So that would support the creation of new types of grocery businesses. They also want to specifically build ones that just sell online. What do you make of that? Just looking at different types of grocery businesses. Is there a need? Theo?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, though, again, if you have to take it almost from a hyper-local lens. Different communities across Metro Vancouver and British Columbia are going to have different needs. The further out from city centers and distribution spaces you're going to be, the more travel and shipping that will be required. So what are the commodity items that are going to be more expensive to get out there? And are there ways and incentives we can put into place along with those guardrails to support that kind of local innovation amongst farmers and amongst youth who are coming up with incredible strategies and ideas? We're seeing a whole new generation of thinkers and doers who are coming up with ideas, new ways of vertical farming, of working with existing space, and how can we move it quickly, but through decolonized practices and in concert with what we're facing around climate change. That is what we need to foster and to spark.
And Kent, another part of this is to introduce legislation to mandate harmonized unit pricing requirements. We've heard this before, this call for those that commonality there so that people can actually comparison shop. What do you make of that?
Well, Michelle, honestly, I don't know what to make of that. People can comparison shop already. But I think what Theo spoke of just moments ago is actually more critical. I think creating an environment where new models of food retail within new models of food systems that encourage robust local regional economies and businesses and actors to thrive is job one.
Okay, so again, it's about increasing competition. It also asks for policies to encourage international players to set up shop in Canada. Do either of you want to comment on that? So inviting more international grocers and companies into the country as well.
Well, I can speak to that very briefly, and I'd love to hear Kent's thoughts on it as well. I mean, 80% of all head lettuce that comes into British Columbia comes from somewhere else. We, and likely California, and we all know that the California basin is in threat due to climate change. And so the question I have is, in introducing, new actors from across borders. Yes, we need to make sure that there's enough food to go all around. But at the same time, I don't want to take away from the focus, again, that supports local innovations, local producers, in producing, for example, that head lettuce that we can be growing more of. We can be growing and distributing food that makes sense in this ecosystem, to better support all families and folks facing economic barriers. So it's a little bit of a balance for me when I read that in the report. Yes, you can open up, but please don't take away from any resources we would be putting into our local communities.
Ken, so what do you make of that? Focusing more on local.
I would agree with Theo. If we open it up to international retailers, we're just going to see the movement of big retail, more big retail come in, and they'll keep playing the same game, which is competing with one another to put the others out of business until they get to the critical level of players and create an oligarchy, and then they'll start doing what Loblaws and others did and fix prices and otherwise manipulate the system to their own profitability. Doing more of the same is not going to fix the situation. We really need to step back and examine our economic strategies and to build a resilient food system future that is going to serve the breadth of society and provide wholesome, nutritious food that is affordable and that supports the community on the whole. We need to focus on building more robust, more vibrant, more comprehensive local regional food systems, and for our future in terms of resiliency, it's doubly important to do so.
Okay, well, I'll ask you more about that. Then what should be the focus when it comes to that? Actually, we're hearing from a farmer now by email. Michelle writes, that sells some of our product. I'm a farmer that sells some of our product directly to a local, but also a large grocery store chain. We were appalled at the markup of our produce. And we sold for $1 per pound bulk, and the store was charging almost $3 per pound. We were unable to get much more than a few cents increase in our price gouging at its best. And what do you make of that? The difference between, selling, Kent, you deal with farmers. What do you make of Michelle's experience there?
Well, it's typical, and this is really the essence of the dynamic that I referred to at the beginning of our discussion, where farmers are price takers. When you walk into the supermarket, you typically enter into the produce section, and the markup on fresh fruits and vegetables is typically between 40 and 75%. It's the highest profit center in the supermarkets, and oftentimes what the retailers are willing to pay farmers for that produce doesn't even cover the cost of production, which is, and if the farmer's unwilling to take those prices, then the retail sector will just go offshore or wherever production occurs.
Which is what we see, yeah.
This is what you see all the time.
Yeah.
So it's a fundamental problem in our food system.
Let's quickly get a call in from Jim in the Thompson Valley. Hi, Jim.
Hi. I would suggest the way to get food inflation down is to bring in democracy, where the people make the decisions on forming policy around our food systems. For example, maybe the people would like to have a crown corporation that sells food in order to compete with the private sector. similar to what Petro-Canada did in the past when it was owned by the government of Canada. It set a profit level, and the other companies actually were controlled by Petro-Can's prices. We had cheaper gas prices with Petro-Canada. But the people have all the ideas to bring down food prices, and we need to incorporate the ideas from the people rather than the government, which seems to be supported by big corporations like Loblaws.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Loblaws received federal funding for freezers. They have a corporate protectionist system here in Canada that keeps out competition from abroad. And the government, as I say, could be easily involved in the food business to help bring down prices. The government could allow farmers markets on crown lands, on government lands.
Okay, more government. More for free. Jim, thank you very much. More government involvement, and that was brought up by one of our emailers as well. And now in 2019, the federal government announced it would provide up to $12 million to help the grocery chain convert refrigeration systems in about 370 stores. And that's part of what Jim referred to in that call. Kent and Theo, thank you very much for your time and joining us for this discussion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Kent.
Absolutely. Anytime, Michelle.
Take care, both of you. Theo Lamb is Executive Director of Quest Outreach Society. Kent Mullenix is Director of Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. This morning, affordability was also top of mind at the Western Premiers Conference that took place in Whistler. It included 9 premiers, including Premier David Eby. Here's what he had to say on affordability.
The other piece that was throughout this morning's conversation was the issue of affordability, that everything that governments are doing is informed by increasing anxiety in communities across Western Canada around the cost of living. This is especially true in the territories where they have seen dramatic cost escalations, but consistent from Manitoba all the way through to British Columbia around cost of living that people are facing, and our government's efforts to bring down those costs through improved efficiency, through initiatives around housing, and other government programs.
That is BC Premier, of course, David Eby speaking this morning in Whistler at the Western Premiers Conference, talking about affordability there. And they talked about other items as well, including infrastructure. Well, that's it for our show today. Thank you so much to everyone who called in and joined the program. Thank you very much for listening and for watching us live stream as well. Have a great afternoon. We'll talk tomorrow.